I will be introducing Felix up to the stage. He's part of Very Good Ventures, and he's also the creator of Block. And joining him will be our very own Xavier, part of the At Company, creator of At App.
Today we're just kicking off with a little talk about open source Flutter templates. So Felix and I have both been working on our own things sort of in the same space, and we've been talking back and forth about sort of some of the problems we found within our companies and some of the solutions we found alongside that. So do you mind to jump into the next slide?
Yep.
Thanks. So my name is Xavier Chanthavong. I work at the At Company as a developer advocate. And so I'm also a student, but I'm balancing back and forth between the two things. And I'm the creator of At App, which you'll hear about in a bit.
And I'm Felix. I'm an engineer at Very Good Ventures, as Xavier already mentioned, and primarily working on tooling and open source recently. And as Xavier mentioned, we've been kind of working on in the templating space for Flutter and kind of bootstrapping apps, which is kind of how we cross paths, which is awesome. So super excited to be here.
So for the agenda, we're sort of going to run through an intro to Mason. That's something we're both using with our templating engines, I guess, if you will. And then we're going to talk about how templates are being used at Very Good Ventures, as well as how they're used at the At Company. And then we're just going to talk about open source templates in general and some of the use cases. And then we'll end off by seeing a preview of something Felix has been working on.
Awesome. So quick intro to Mason, which is kind of the basis for a lot of the tooling that we've been working on. It's an open source package written in Dart that you can download today on pub.dev. And it basically is intended to help you create and consume reusable templates, which we call bricks. So you can get started today by installing Mason from pub via Dart pub global activate Mason _CLI, or you can also install. Okay, cool. So yeah, you can install Mason from pub.dev, or you can also install it from Homebrew if you're a Mac user. And basically, Mason was just inspired by a bunch of other open source tools like Stagehand from the Dart ecosystem, Cookie Cutter from Python, Yeoman from JavaScript. And the goal was to kind of make it as easy as possible for developers to define reusable chunks of code via Mustache, which is a really simple spec for writing templates, and then have a tool that consumes those templates and then outputs reusable code. So you can kind of see a little GIF on the top right corner of what it looks like to use a template that already exists. So there's like the simple greeting template. You can define a number of inputs with various types. You can customize the prompting for the user and have some auto-completion for default values. And then at the end of the day, the CLI will collect all those inputs, render the template wherever the user specifies. So these templates can be as simple as a single markdown file, like in this example, or as complex as a fully fledged Flutter app with like hundreds of files and thousands of lines of code. And the ecosystem right now consists of the core Mason package, which contains all of the generation logic and templating engine, and then the CLI, which handles all of these interactions with the command line. There's also a logger library, which is helpful if you want like a reusable logger implementation. And then there's this API package, which is used to communicate with the backend, which I'll talk about later on in the presentation. And so at Very Good Ventures, the primary use case for templates that we have right now in the open source is through our Very Good CLI. So if you haven't already checked it out, I highly recommend it if you're building Flutter apps or our Dart packages. We kind of provide a variety of different templates that you can start with that build on top of what you get from Flutter Create. So you can use Very Good CLI to create a new Dart package using the Dart _PKG template name, Flutter package, Flutter plugin, which is using the federated plugin architecture. And the most popular template that we have is the one called Very _Good _core. That's the default template. So when you run Very Good create and then specify your app name, you'll get the core template, which is a Flutter app that basically has a bunch of VGV's opinionated best practices in mind. So we have flavors out of the box for development, staging, and production environments. Internationalization is set up using Flutter's recommended approach for internationalization. We use Block for state management, but you can swap it out for your own, obviously. All the code that's generated is fully tested using unit and widget tests. We also ship it with GitHub workflows that format, lint, run your tests, verify test coverage. And we have a really strict set of lint rules that we use at VGV called Very _Good _analysis that the project comes with. So it's a really handy place to start if you kind of want an opinionated starter that you kind of just like want those decisions made for you. You don't want to take the time to like put all these pieces together, and you want to just start building your app. It's still a counter app at the end of the day, so it's still like bare bones in terms of functionality, but the bones of the project are made to be scalable and help you build an app that will kind of grow to like many developers, many lines of code, and support various like apps of different complexity. So we highly recommend checking it out. It's open source, like I mentioned, on GitHub. We have 1.3K stars. We also looked at the analytics for if you choose to opt into analytics. We kind of record how many people create projects using Very Good CLI, and I think we're around like 7,000 projects created using Very Good CLI, which is super awesome to see. And that kind of goes to show the power of open sourcing when it comes to templates, because it has such an exponential impact on the community and the amount of time saved, so that people aren't re-implementing the same things or spending time just setting up projects. So that's a little bit about Very Good CLI, and hand it off to Xavier about templating at the app company.
Okay, so templates at the at company, just sort of to begin. So the goal behind our templates were sort of to create an opportunity for us to show samples of our code. So through sample applications as well as demo apps, just so that people could start to learn to use some of our technology, because onboarding can be a little challenging at times, right? And so additionally, one thing I also wanted to do was create some sort of standard template that people could start from. So a skeleton application template, if you will. And I just wanted a way to very easily distribute these to various developers, one centralized place where you could ship them. And so that's sort of what AdApp became. And so I've recently just released a package called AdApp Create, which the goal behind it is to make it very easy for you to be able to create your own Flutter Create. So if you wanted to create your own version with your own custom templates, that's a package I'm working on that will allow you to be able to do that. And so I've actually released two packages that sort of go hand in hand. AdApp Create is sort of the models that are a wrapper around Mason. And then I've also created a bundler, which takes my sort of configuration files that allow you to configure the platform config for the generated application. And that gets bundled in to the modeling library as well. And from there, you're able to just quickly generate a Flutter application. And so some other things that I'm working on with this are setting up some real pipelines so that we can actually write these apps, update them, and then quickly test them without having to put in too much additional effort into from I guess the raw application versus the bundled version, right? So we need there's a sort of some what's the word I'm looking for? I guess there's some issues in being able to test them just normally how you would with a basic Flutter application. So that's something I'm working on overcoming. And then I will also like to add desktop platform support in the future. And that's a bit on how we're using them. Okay, so in terms of open source templates, the reason behind them is we really want to get the power of the crowd going. There's a lot more Flutter developers out there besides just me and Felix, and we always want to hear your feedback, because there are so many things we don't know that we'd like to learn from you guys and from each other. And so some things we wanted to touch on here were the big two things we find open source templates being really powerful is being able to see how other people are creating their projects and potentially how they're iterating on them or creating new features through various widgets. Or the other thing is, if there's very common patterns that are repeatable within your application, you might want to build a template for it, and being able to share that is really powerful too. Felix, did you want to touch on anything here?
No, I think you covered most of what I was going to say as well. I think the big ways that we use templating at VGV as well are by bootstrapping projects. So if you're on a team that you find yourself often creating a new app, or you find yourself often creating new packages, then automating those boring steps and kind of enforcing a consistent standard approach is super handy and saves a lot of time. But then also, like Xavier mentioned, when you're iterating on a project, maybe you have a structure that you follow for adding a new feature. Maybe you have a structure you follow for adding new data classes or new GitHub workflows or whatever the case might be. So things that are kind of tedious, boring, and easy to error-prone areas are great candidates for things that can be automated and make use of something like a templating engine. So I think, yeah, the power of the crowd is super important here because we all kind of solve similar problems over and over and over again, and sharing solutions with the greater community will just help save everyone some time and kind of proliferate popular approaches or ways of doing things. Some common use cases that we kind of just rattled off for like templating and using a tool like Mason in general are, like I mentioned, if you're creating a new app. Also, maybe if you're creating a new CLI tool, like if you're constantly creating tooling like CLI servers, game templates. We mentioned Dart libraries and packages and plugins, but also like at the widget or component level, like if you have a very particular way that you like to structure your components into, like if you categorize them into like routable versus non-routable, and if you have a certain way you do dependency injection, all those things can be templated and you can kind of standardize across your team. Like I mentioned earlier, creating a new feature is another thing. Like if you have a very specific feature structure that you follow at on your team or at your company, CI/CD is another one. Adding new workflows, adding a code magic config can be templated. Testing is another one where sometimes we follow the same like approach and structure for all of our tests. When we use a state management library like Block or Qubit, for example, maybe you've used the VS Code extension or snippets. Those are great candidates for things that can be templated as well. But also beyond just code, like using templates for things like READMEs, change logs, even we use them for things like blog posts and Markdown at Very Good Venture. So it's kind of like sky's the limit for things that you can apply, like a tool like Mason, to kind of help automate. And it's not intended to kind of like replace developers in any way or by any means. They're more, these cases are things that at least I personally think of as just like tedious, things that are easy to like forget steps, or like miss like small things and introduce small inconsistencies. And adding a tool like Mason will just help you kind of streamline that process, increase the consistency across your team and across your code base, and like save you the time so that you focus on more important, interesting work and less on this like boring bootstrapping or boilerplate types of tasks. So, and there's many more that I probably haven't thought of. And so that's why open source is super cool, because you get the whole community involved and everyone has different use cases and different like experiences and environments that they work on. So we can kind of build off of each other's ideas and use cases. Oops. And as we mentioned in the agenda, we have this preview teaser. It's still in the very early stages, but ever since we started working on Mason in the open source, questions have been asked constantly by the community and by teammates, like, okay, but how can we share templates easily? Like, is there a standard centralized place where templates can be published, and how can you easily like distribute these and discover new templates? And so over the past few months, we've been working on a platform called BrickHub. You can check it out now. It's still really, really early stages, but you can basically browse, publish, and install templates from a central registry. So it's very much like a pub.dev for templates that are that Mason can consume. And so again, still really early stage, but you can check it out and keep an eye on the site for. We're gonna hopefully have like an early closed alpha where like a small group of people can try it out, start publishing their own templates, and slowly expand over time. So if you're interested in that and you want more details, follow me on Twitter or check out brickhub.dev. And I think with that, we can turn it over to questions, if there are any.
Mason is more just like the raw templating library, whereas AdApp is a whole CLI tool. So of course I've gone and I've embedded many other things, but at its core, AdApp is very similar to being able to run Flutter create. So it generates a template for me. Like that's the main feature of AdApp. And so I've sort of taken Mason and I've wrapped a whole bunch of other things that I needed around it, which allowed me to generate more. So Mason being a templating library allows you to just generate any sort of file, right? Depending on what you put in your brick. And so one of the things I've done with AdApp is specifically cater it to generating Flutter apps. So that's the main difference, I'd say.
Thanks. One good question I have on open source templates. I'm wondering what are some of the shortcomings you might see in existing templates, like for React or Angular as an example, and how you're hoping to build Mason and AdApp to overcome those.
So do you want to talk about Mason a little bit first on that? I think that's a better
Sure.
question.
Yeah. Can everyone hear me? Is the echo okay? Yeah. So in terms of the shortcomings of templates, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with any of the existing templates. Like you mentioned, React and Create React App. I think the big thing that we were trying to address with Mason is make it more accessible and standardize the approach in which people can create templates to kind of like reduce the entry or the barrier to entry to create your own template. So like if you have a new kind of approach that works really well for you and your team, to kind of make it as easy as possible to make that reproducible and repeatable, and have a template that you can just bundle and share with other people, whether it's just internally within your company or more broadly with the open source community. So I don't think there's anything really wrong with any of the templates. It's not like the content of the templates that we're trying to improve. It's just the mechanism through which you create templates and distribute templates, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers your question. I see there's another one. I can try to quickly answer this from my side. So can Mason do code generation on the native side? That's kind of the nice thing about Mason, is even though the tool itself is written in Dart, the code that you generate from the tool can be for any programming language. Like we mentioned, examples could include packages in Dart or JavaScript. You can generate Markdown files. So you can absolutely generate native iOS or Android code if you want that to be like the use case for your template. And I believe Xavier is actually generating some of the build system files as part of the template at the app company, if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, so right now that's like the main goal of what I'm doing with app is making it super easy to just generate the platform configuration, like depending on what you need. Right now, I actually have nothing set up for iOS. I've only needed to configure Android for my own personal needs. So I've done things like Kotlin version, Gradle version, things like that, as well as like SDK versions. So the idea is that you can just specify all that in a YAML file, and then when you bundle it, it actually you can specify whether you want to override the default values or whatever. So you can actually modify it within your CLI if you wanted to as well. And there are different ways that you can handle that. But the main goal behind all of that is to just be able to write a single line in the YAML file rather than having to dig through all those template files. Because, for example, you have 7, 8. Right now, I think I'm sitting at I want to say 7 or 8 templates within mine, and some of them are full sample apps. So just being able to have 7 YAML files rather than 7 massive directories makes it really easy to configure these templates as I need them really quickly. Was that question? I'm not sure if that thanks was for Mason, but you're welcome. So I think we're pretty much done here. So thank you for joining us, Felix. And
yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks to everyone for having me. It was super fun, and hopefully everyone will build some open source templates and then share them with us.